Well, hello, and welcome back to the Patristic YouTube channel. I'm delighted to be joined, just the three of us today, by Mark and Marcus, a return of the OG crew, as it were. And today I am particularly excited because we're going to be looking at some of the behind the scenes as to what goes into building some of the hypotheses and conclusions that Mark, and I have made about both the Marcionite corpus and the Ignatian corpus, and soon, I'm sure, many other texts as well. Mark is going to show us a bit about how the sausage is made, some of the statistical word analysis that he gets up to, and how this informs the work that we do together. So, without wanting to babble on too much, Mark, take it away. What have you got for us?
Sure. Well, this is stuff that Marcus has been working on for decades, doing word counts, but often doing them manually through the years. And that's where our collaboration, starting a little over a year ago, to create data sets, can speed up certain things or just confirm things that were already found through manual counts, but now can be accessed maybe more quickly or confirmed through computerized counts. So we have data sets of Marcus's Apostolos version in its current form. Those are publicly available through the Harvard Dataverse, so you can access those, but they are a couple months out of date. So there have been additional refinements, and then those will be resubmitting those to the publisher. It's been provisionally or conditionally accepted. But these are based on the latest data sets, comparing the 10 letters of Paul in the Marcionite collection with the 10 letters in the canonical collection. And again, rather than going manually, basically this code here that I'm showing real quick, just a snippet of, looks at the lowercase version of both. So we have some functions and algorithms that change the text into lowercase forms, unaccented forms for both. Here's Marcus's version right here. And then here's the 10 letters of Paul in the BibleWorks Greek morphology text. So these are all computer derived. And so right now we'll look at the Marcionite table, basically to give you a little guide to this table. The left is just a raw count. So 135 times the definite article ha, probably just the masculine singular nominative in this case, occurs in the Marcionite text, 492 in the canonical. This here, Marcionite FRQ, is frequency. So that, and this uses a multiple of 100. So it's taking the total count divided by the total words in that text, the Marcionite text, multiplying it by 100. So this would be a fairly high frequency word. Two times out of every 100 times that word occurs. It's a little less frequent in the canonical text. So Canon frequency, FRQ. And then here's a frequency difference, FRQ diff. So that just subtracts the canonical or the Marcionite from the canonical. And then ABS is absolute. So I wanted to weigh, sometimes you have features that are more frequent in the Marcionite text, sometimes features are more frequent in the canonical text, but we want to look at absolute difference between the two. And then on the right, you can see the method. So unigrams is just looking at each word as one token by itself. Bigrams would be looking at two words in connection. And this is not getting into things in this particular table or analysis, not getting into things like morphology, what kind of mood or tense a verb is, whether a noun is genitive or nominative, these kinds of things. It's just looking at the word form itself, again, lowercase and de-accented. So this is the Marcionite propensities. And then we have another table that is the canonical propensities. And then we wanted to make this a little more accessible to the general public. So we created a visualization using a word cloud package in R so that people can visualize this. So these would be the Marcionite propensities, the things that tend to occur more often in the Marcionite text than the canonical text. And then this word cloud is more the canonical propensities, the things that have a significantly higher frequency in the canonical text than the Marcionite text. And again, this is just one way of coming at the data, but we just thought we'd open this up and scroll through. And then, I think Marcus is really the expert here because he's been working on this text for years and years and years, is doing the final refinement on his version. So I just thought it'd be nice to bring together some of the computational analysis that I've been doing with his meticulous word by word counts. And Marcus has already published a lexicon of the pre-canonical and the canonical versions, which is available. But in some ways, this is like a computerized version of that lexicon, just from different angles, looking at it. So maybe I'll turn it over to Marcus, and you can kind of walk us through some of these words. You know, when I'm starting to look at the Marcionite propensities here, these words to me all look like very common Greek words. There's nothing that's peculiar or strange or deviant. There's nothing heretical about these words. They're just very commonplace Greek words, the kind of words we would expect to find and do find all over the place in Paul, in the writings of Paul. But Marcus, would you like to give us some thoughts about this?
Yeah, absolutely. Would it be possible to get the two word clouds next to each other?
The one dilemma that we have with that is the resizing.
Yeah, don't
so
tell us
we could just...
which is what. Yeah, so give us the two next to each other, and then we can ask the listeners and the people who watch to guess which is what.
I'm just
I will guess
concerned that
myself.
if I try to put it side by side, it's going to get wonky, and
yeah,
I don't think
doesn't matter.
viewers...
Yeah, put it side by side, even if it's getting a bit wonky. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, let's have it like that.
All right. Okay.
So if I had to guess, I would say left is Marcionite, the right one is the canonical one. What's the audience saying? We will see. Jack,
comment down below. Pause it and comment down below. I'd struggle to disagree with Marcus as the expert. I'm going to bow to his interpretation. But
Okay.
if you are at home, pause it now. Comment below. I'll be checking your answers. No cheating.
Okay. If you have done the choice, yeah, let me explain why I think left is Marcionite and the right one would be the canonical one. But first of all, we need to ask Mark whether I'm right or wrong.
That's it. That's exactly it.
So how did I come to it? It's not guesswork, so I don't have the concordance and the lexicon in front of me. But I can tell you, just from the first core word, which you see on the canonical one, you have de. Now, for those people who can't read Greek, de in Greek means usually the adversative. It means but. And one of the core features which I came across and which I really stumbled upon and was surprised was how many times the canonical text works with a kind of a logical argument that works in terms of adversatives, of contradictions, of stating against some other text. So to me, the first question was, how and why do we have a canonical text which is so prominently working against other people's opinions? And even within its own frame, it frames statements which are so many times a statement against a statement which has been put in front of it before. So it's rather a conglomerate of counter arguments than of proposes and proposing arguments. So that was the first experience which I've made, and that's why it was so easy for me to discover the two. But here comes the two most, the biggest, next biggest terms here on the right cloud is humas and humon. Humas is the accusative of you in the plural. And humon is the genitive of the same word. So it's of us. And this is the second feature. Yeah. And this is the second feature of the canonical text, which I came across without the computer sciences here. I've noticed that ever so often, the canonical text tries to create, almost like a fictional creation, a scenery of a community. It is as if Paul is not a singular author, but he's a spokesperson with others and for others. Every now and every so often, you have Paul talking with brothers like Timothy, like Sosthenes, like others, in the name of a community, and he includes himself within the people to whom he talks. Quite contrasting is the Marcionite version. If you look into the cloud on the left, you will hardly find, I mean, you have to have glasses bigger than mine to find the words humon or humas, you. I mean, I haven't even found it. Don't know where they are. So it is in the right in the center, as Mark has showed before, it is ho. It is the article, and it is a subject. And if you might compare the left with the right, we have a comparison between, on the left side, the Marcionite text, which is a discourse-oriented text, which has subjects, and you can see how varied the subject is. Yeah, it's charis, grace, it's soma, body, it's eirene, it's freedom, it's or peace, it's apostolos Paulus, so it's Paul the apostle, it's nomon, so it's law, it's patros, it's the father, it's Jesus, yeah, it's anthropos, it's human beings. All over the place, it's law. It's also sarki, it's flesh, and. What you get in the Marcionite text, right from Galatians to the end of the 10 letters, is a rather rational, dispassionate discourse with very, very few attempts to talk straight to the people, to involve yourself and to be involved and to get involved. It is like a lecture in an academic discourse, which rolls down, which has little moral. It's a lot to do with what do people do, what people think, what people believe, and what's happening. Ek estin is a very good word as well. So it's a derivation. Ek means out, yeah. So it takes an argument, takes another from it, and develops the argument further. A dispassionate text. When it comes to the canonical text on the right side, it is so much the opposite. It is like a fighting text. It's a text that wants to emphasize things, to convince people. It's like a homily. When I showed the two texts side by side to one of my colleagues who is not a theologian, but an ancient historian, he said to me, well, this is two worlds. This is the world of academia on the one side, and the other one is the world of preaching. You get the 10 letters within the 14 letters collection of the canonical text as you get it here. So you have mu, it's me. You have de, which is but. You have kai and eis, which leads to an argument. You have us, humes, humas, humin, humon. All these words which are inclusive, which are drawing the people into the discourse that's developing, which is no longer just a discourse, but it's like a preaching, an ovation. It's people being overrolled with the kind of arguments. I think this is the most phenomenal distinctive features which we already can see from these two small clouds which the computer has created. I think a fantastic work of art which shows exactly the different characteristics between the 10-letter collection, which is an academic discourse, and a preaching, almost a paraenesis, a discourse for the church and in the community on the right side.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. It's staggering because it affirms, as Mark said, so many of the things that you had suspected even before this great analysis, but only dives deeper into it. It's really interesting, I think, because I used a similar methodology for the Ignatian corpus, as viewers will know. And as Mark said at the beginning, using Control F to search for all of the various recension, conjugations and declensions. And, you go through the whole list, which is all well and good, until you forget a second aorist right at the end, and you have to go back and revise your tables. But it was sort of unknown to me what the precedent was. And one of our viewers said to me in the comments that this sort of methodology was weak source, to use their quote. They said that it doesn't work. And I just wanted to bring to the viewers' attention that what Mark is doing and what Marcus and I were doing in a more rudimentary manner is not exclusive to us. It's not as if we made this methodology up ex nihilo for our own ends. And there was a couple of studies that I just wanted to draw your attention to that I referenced in my thesis, which are specifically dealing with Twitter identification and the authors of tweets and other author identifications and other texts as well. I think particularly of Ying Zhao and Justin Zobel, who wrote an article called Effective and Scalable Authorship Attribution Using Function Words, and another by Mohammed Boukhaled and Jean-Gabriel Ganassia, which is called Using Function Words for Authorship Attribution, Bag of Words versus Sequential Rules. And what these two articles and others that I reference really put home to me is that even in small texts like tweets, with a really high degree of accuracy, they can pinpoint the authorship of various tweets from various different accounts that are seemingly unconnected just based on what we call function words. And you're seeing a lot of these function words come up in these two charts here. So function words are words like day, kai, ace, ho. They're words that I call them in my thesis benign. They're inoffensive. They're not dogmatic. They're not suggesting any great theological, doctrinal, or practical difference. They're words that you and I use every day, idioms or even smaller words. I was talking just before Marcus joined the call. Marcus, hope you don't mind me saying that one of your great idioms is, yes, look, I tell you. That's one of your great idioms. And I know that if I was to read 100 essays, if I saw that, I know that that one would probably be Marcus's because it's his trademark. And my beginning for this podcast is usually, well, hello. And I'm sure if Mark or Marcus ran a podcast, it would come out differently. They might use different words. And they're words that we don't realize that are even being spoken or written or put out into the ether. They're just part of the style which we use. And these two word charts, I think, are absolutely perfect in showing that. And that the big words I emphasize, as Marcus mentioned some of the meanings a minute ago, they truly are benign. They're words that you would expect in any text, in any author. And the difference is one of stylistic, but also personal authorship. Yes, there is the homiletic versus academic stuff going on, but I'm sure that some of this would also have played out regardless of the text type they were writing, the genre, because that's just how these people were taught.
I think it's really helpful too to think about how we can validate these results from a lot of different perspectives. So in the beginning of our translation of Marcus's edition, Jack, we did a named entity analysis, counted up all the names, all the geographical locations, and you just see a very high frequency of personal names in the canonical text and a very low frequency of personal names. We don't even see that in these word clouds. We're not seeing all the different names, the nearly 100 names in the canonical version, 95 of which don't appear in the Marcionite version. But you see the same pattern because you see the fictive kinship, you see the family, the community that's implied in these high frequency terms, the of you, the to you, prosumos, humas, humin, humon, right? As these super high frequency words, you can tell that the canonical text is creating a family. It's envisioning the ecclesia, the assembly, as a family. It's elaborating huge name lists and starting letters and ending letters with greetings. Aspazamai, to me, that aspazeste, this is, to me, it almost is more like the French sense of giving an embrace, of entering into this family-like community, the kind of the kiss of peace kind of language around that. So it's when you see the same conclusion from multiple perspectives, where you do a named entity analysis, or you just look at the high frequency small words and see these massive disparities of these high frequency terms that show up. These are mutually confirmatory, right? If we were only to see one pattern in one place and nothing else that validated it in another place, well, that could be subject to question. But when you slice the data from 10 different angles and every single angle shows you the same conclusion, then it's just a matter of logic at that point. And really, like, we're entering into what I would say is incontrovertible evidence. Like, this is just one vignette, but when you start looking at the data from all of these different angles, I just don't see how the traditional hypothesis of the Marcionite evisceration holds any water. This just doesn't make any sense of these data patterns.
And that onomastic and geographical feature was also noticed by Marcus in the Ignatian epistles before I even begun my inquiry. And what's interesting about both corpuses is that they start with the short recension is different from the Marcionite Apostolos in many ways, obviously, but they start some more simply. But then we get into, with the canonical and middle recension, what I like to call story time. It is the increase of both the narrative and the family. I like the way you put that, Mark, the family element, the community element. And then Acts, I think, takes that to a whole new level in the canonical text and gives it, with unambiguous terms, here's full story time, sit down and get ready to read. So that progression is also not isolated just to Paul's epistles. It's not just the case that we find it there. We find it, at least in Ignatius. I have no doubt in other texts we'll also find that story time increasing. We might also look at the Evangelion as well, and the increase in story time that happens there between that
absolutely.
and Luke. So
I mean,
this is not isolated.
Look what we have done on the gospel just a short while ago when we talked about the infants' gospels, right? So again, you have story time there, yeah. You have an increasing cloud of narratives, and this is exactly what you get. But you also have got it in the Peter tradition. I mean, look, we have the letters of Peter 2, yeah, in the canonical version. But then we have the homilies and the pseudo-Petrine stuff, which is, again, story time, yeah. And the same you have with the Acts of Paul. So we get clouds and clouds and narratives around these texts that grow ever so big. Let me not just.
We could also think you brought up.
Sorry.
Go ahead. The point I was going to make was just for some refinements that you were adding just this last week about in curio versus in theo. Even that I'm seeing here of curio here and the dative, kurios in curio, right? You see kurios elsewhere of Jesus Christ, of kurios, Christos kurios, but the idea of being in the Lord, in curio,
exactly.
curio, maybe you could expand on that a little bit between the two versions.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite clear that curious, I mean, the Lord, yeah, is the title for Christ in the Marcionite text. Whenever curious is being mentioned in the Marcionite text, it's the Lord, it's Christ. It's not the transcendent God. And just the opposite you have in the canonical text. When it says en curio, it means most of the time, not always, is a bit of inconsistency in the canonical text, but quite often you have it as in God and not in Christ. And here we have got the difference. And this shows us sometimes, and we can use it even for the reconstruction of our texts, if some witnesses give us en Korea, for example, where in other places we have done witnesses who give us en Theo, in God, we can see that we've got either a canonical version or a non-canonical one, a a Marcionite version. But I just want to draw your attention, because these are so speaking, these two word clouds. I'd like to draw your attention at the next lower level, not at the most prominent words here, but at some smaller ones. And it is interesting, below humin, on the right side in the canonical text, maybe Mark, you can point to it. Yeah, we have kago, kai ego, and I. And this is one of the features, again, in the canonical text, that Paul needs to state that he is also one of the other apostles. So what his opinion is being dealt, or what he proposes, is never just his own. He's always, let's say, putting himself a little bit down in the canonical text. So he praises himself, all sorts of things. In the next sentence, he undermines himself, right? He is not credible, and people don't believe him. People struggle with what he's suggesting, and. So kago, and I have to say, and means all the others say, and also I have to say. So he's so in contrast to the 10 letters where in Marcion's collection, it is Paul. There is nobody behind him except Christ. He is the spokesperson. He doesn't, just as he opens in Galatian, what I am, I'm not from man, I'm not through man, I'm just through Christ. And that comes out in the second in the second tier. Also, at the same time, in the middle, next to de, we have eimi, which means I am. And you see the struggle Paul has in the canonical text. He puts himself forward. He says, I am A and B and C and D. And unfortunately, nobody believes me. And so fortunately, the apostles help me in believing me, and God helps me, and Christ helps me. And the number of times he has to say that he is not a liar, that he's telling the truth. Because I think when people read these canonical texts in the beginning, they must have thought these texts are forgeries. These are lies, because we have another text. And so this text repeatedly has to insist that what's being put in front of the people to read is the truth. And he claims God and Christ and all the rest of the people, they all support that what he's saying is what it is, and it is true. None of that in the Marcionite text. No claim, no struggle. Yes, he has to fight, and he has to work against some of the apostles, but that's what it is. It's a discourse. So another feature which has to do with this kind of struggle of Paul in the canonical text is pantote. You have it under kai. Kai is an important word in the canonical because it's adding and adding and adding stuff. And pantote is an expression which you also find very rarely in the pre-canonical one. In the canonical one, it's like Trump. Sorry for the comparison. But it is everything has to be exaggerated. It's not enough to say, oh, we have A and B and we have done C and D. No, you have to say it's total disaster. The world is miserable. Pantote everywhere where we look, it's just nightmares, right? And we have to remediate everything, pantote. Wherever we look, we have to make it different. Kai, and we have to do this and this and this and God knows what. So it's this type of emphasizing and also emphatic language that you will find in the canonical texts, which are almost, with very few occasions, it is absent from the 10-letter collection of the Marcionite version. So again, we have somebody who is a big speaker, and forgive me again the comparison, we have the Biden on the left side who loses sometimes a bit of track and is not really convincing, but knows what he says, and you can prove it. Sometimes he got the numbers a bit wrong, but in principle, right, you can trust the text. On the right side, the speaker, like Trump, has to indicate every second phrase that what he's saying is the truth and nothing but the truth, because the truth, even if the truth is wrong, he is right. That's the canonical text. So you have the choice.
We have a lot of self-implicating language too in the canonical version. Some of them are smaller, so they're harder to see. Mu is pretty large, of me, but I also notice we have me here, the accusative me. We have me, which is another form of that. So this goes together with the ego over here and kago. We have a lot of self-implicating language, a lot of self-referential language. To put it another way, we have a lot of Pauline autobiography or pseudo-autobiography
Exactly.
that surfaces in the canonical version that you don't see in the Marcionite version. Marcion loved Paul. Paul was his apostle, but Paul doesn't talk about himself in the Marcionite version. But in the canonical version, Paul keeps talking about himself. He's self-obsessed, maybe even narcissistic, right? I don't think it's an actual narcissism because this is the canonical redaction, and so it's creating a fictionalized persona around Paul. It's lionizing him. It's lifting him up. It's turning him into a great heroic martyr type figure and sophist, a great rhetor, even if he's underappreciated. But also making him part of this much broader community of the apostolic college or collegium and these many large communities throughout Asia Minor and Greece and so on. You don't really get a sense of a huge movement on this text on the left side. It is a discourse, but on the right you get a sense of Paul is part of something that's much larger than himself, a community, and he is this key role. You can see ethnon here. It's again small ethnon, but that's another distinguishing feature of this identity that's wrapped up in him being the apostle to the Gentiles, whereas the other apostles are apostles to the Judeans or what have you. But the logical language too, I think we've already brought that out. But hati, because, therefore, ara, consequently, we just get a lot more logical progressions of more sophisticated and sequential and logical, even causal movements from passage to passage. Everything follows more as a coherent sort of topical discourse compared to, and then references to writings. I see kathos gegraptai, just as it has been written. Egrapsa I saw in one place as I wrote. So there's also just much more of an obsession with the past writings, whether it's the scriptures of the Judeans or it's Paul's own past writings that starts to surface here. Yeah, I'm sure we could add a lot more, but Jack, do you want to give us add some more perspective here?
Sorry, my cat was trying to pull my headset off. The way I almost look at the right hand side is almost like I don't know what to call it, but like a quasi autobiographical, that's pseudonymous, that's also hagiography. Right, it's all of those things. The right hand side. It's an attempt to tell the story of the person from the first person's perspective that isn't true. So in that sense, it's not autobiographical, but is trying to be, but is certainly hagiography, because although he does use self-effacing language, he then will say something like, "But by the Lord, I'm the greatest person that's ever lived. In fact, I'm the possible. I'm just absolutely brilliant." And that's the sort of this sort of whiplash connection you get with canonical Paul. That yes, he is the lowest of the low, but he's also the best of the best, and somehow those two things are meant to merge together. I think that one of the things that really struck me when I was reading the two side by side, and we've talked about this before in the edited version that I edited for you, Mark, the translation of Marx's, was, and this only really came to me when I was rereading it after the discussion we had about schools and the efforts schools made with the Evangelion or with their other gospels, that you would write a text with the hope that, no one ever writes a gospel, I should say, with the idea that theirs will be one among four, right? You write your gospel probably thinking that yours is going to be the winner, and you try and write the best one you can so that your school, like other Greek schools of the Epicureans or the Sophists or whoever else, would attract people. It would draw people to your line of thinking. And one of the things about the Marcionite apostolos that struck me after that conversation was that it struck me as a text to convince, a text that was making good discussion, that was following a logical order, that was not being that was not filled with hyperbole. As Mark has mentioned, maybe the Trump analogy only goes so far, but certainly there's something to be said there, right? That there is this hyperbolic position of the canonical stuff. Everything, all the time, no exceptions. Pre-canonical Paul, the Marcionite version, is trying to show you systematically what's going on. And in some sense, obviously, we might assume, I don't know what your opinions are, that these actually were written to different churches. But they do, even one after the other, when you read them as just one set, they do go together, right? They show a consistency. They show no great irregularities. Something that we do find, particularly when we add the pastorals into canonical Paul, things get really crazy really quickly, and lots of things change from the 10 to the extra 3. And even inside the 10, I think there is some confusing points where canonical Paul contradicts himself. So, I mean, that they were the views that sort of occurred to me after our discussion about Gospels and the way in which schools would have written their texts to try and bring people in. Like I say, no hyperbole, no craziness, just bring it back to basic.
Let me also add one theological topic, because that is pretty prominent on the canonical word cloud. And you have it one time very small, but another time a bit bigger, which is en Christo. You have it underneath the ga and the humon. That's the small one, but a bit to the right, you have bigger. Yeah, here we have got en Christo Jesu. And it was interesting. I met a few weeks ago Teresa Morgan. She is the colleague for New Testament and Patristic Studies at Oxford University. And Teresa has written quite a pile of books, and the pile is very big because the books are big. So she has written a 600-800 pages book on pistis, just on this one word, in antiquity. And because she's also a classics colleague, so she works on the words and on the semantics and the meaning of the words, not just in the Christian context, but also the Jewish context and in the classical context. So likewise, she also published one of their latest books, was on the two words en Christo, in Christ. And a fairly small book for her terms, because it's just got about 300 pages, but you can write 300 pages on these two words. So I was reading the book with great expectations and also with a great insight, because she shows in this book how Paul uses en Christo. And she can show that while Paul shares most of the time, when he used these words en Christo, most of the time he used it instrumental, just as Cicero would have used the same en plus dative plus a person, or any other classical author would have used this construct with en and the dative. So en and with. It's instrumental, which means if I say with Mark en Marco, then it means I'm using Mark. So on behalf of what Mark is providing us here with the word clouds, that's en Marco, right? So with the help of Mark, I'm doing what I'm doing. And this is even when he uses en Christo. So most of the time in the canonical version, when he uses en Christo, it is using Christ in order to support his argument. So most of the time when he's fiercely bringing moral judgment or moral advice to people, at the end he says, and this I really say to you, you have to behave well because I'm saying it en Christo, on behalf of Christ. So Christ is the stick behind my words. And that's the classical way you use these kind of combination. And then she comes and says, but there is a very specific use of these words which Paul does not share so far as she has looked at, and she has looked at the times from 600 before Christ to 500 after Christ, I can't remember. But she says there's one specific type of how these two words are used where Paul is very unique. And this, what she calls, is a hand, or it's a substantial use. She says it's like being in the hand of somebody else. So en Christo, where Paul is unique, means me being in the hand of Christ. I'm almost ontologically linked to Christ. And these usages in the canonical text are not so numerous, but they are there, and they're unique. Now, when I read her book, I took my concordance and I took the 10-letter collection and was checking what kind of usage do we have in the 10-letter collection. Now, you can see it from the word cloud here. I haven't found en Christo. Maybe somebody finds it. If you can find it, you're great. I haven't found it, but maybe you find it. So it's a rare combination. But what is even more striking than that it is rare in the canonic, in the Marcionite, and quite common in the canonical one. In the Marcionite collection, you will only find what Teresa Morgan has distinguished and defined as the unique usage of en Christo, which is the unique Pauline one. So all mentions of the common usage of the instrumental form of en and Christo, of in Christ, which you have numerous times in the canonical version, they are all, without any exception, they are all missing in the Marcionite collection. And in the Marcionite collection, Paul is only speaking what Teresa, without knowing the Marcionite collection, without even looking into it, has defined as the unique Pauline voice. Now, if we work on the old assumption that the Marcionite collection is an abbreviation of the canonical Paul, how would it be possible that an abbreviator cuts off all common usages of en Christo and leaves us with Paul's unique voice? Impossible. Historically impossible. So there's only one single other explanation, that the canonical text has used a text which gives us this unique usage of en Christo and muddled it up with how normally people would use en Christo and multiplied it across the letters. That does not mean that the Marcionite collection gives us the otone, the original Paul, but it shows, at least with regards to this connection and combination of a significant theological topic, that the Marcionite collection If there is something unique to Paul, then you will find it in the Marcionite collection, but not in the canonical one. In the canonical one, it's messed up with what the classical Greek has as a normal use.
And it's so funny you say that, because I think there's two elements that I think put the nail in the coffin for me in terms of this methodology. In my Viva, I had a discussion with a good friend of Marcus and I, Professor Alan Brent, in which he said, well, I don't see any reason why, and he was referring to the Ignatian epistles, why a redactor couldn't have taken these words out. And I said to him, look, there's two things about this. The first one is that one has to find a motive for these things to happen. And the idea that people are taking out the name of Jesus, the title of Christ, etc., in the late 2nd century seems to me a crazy one. But even if one accepts this, what you are asking us to deal with is the equivalent of taking out of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings all of the words that are the, because, and with, and changing them to reform a sentence in another manner. That a scribe would do that and then pass it off as Tolkien. These millions of words, I don't know how many, comprise Lord of the Rings, and I appreciate Paul is slightly smaller, is an unfathomable task which would require surgical precision and is essentially a waste of time, because these words, as we pointed out a couple times, don't even mean much. Day, meta, dia, etc. And what you've just pointed to there, Marcus, is just one example. And, you know, again, we re-emphasize for the viewers that if we only found one example, maybe we put our case and say, no, thank you, we're wrong. That's fair enough. But it is one of an innumerable amount of cases of which the cumulative answer to this data is it's an impossibility, or at least with such a degree of improbability requiring infinite monkeys and infinite typewriters, as the old adage goes, to produce or rework such a text in this manner. Whereas when one goes the other way, the progression is easy to track. So it's not even that just looking at the redaction, it's hard. It's that looking at the progression, it's easy. Those two things go together like weighing on the weighing scale.
We could look
Mark's
at
got
this
some
too.
more data here. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just to say the word clouds are very helpful because they're visualizing the differences and, you know, in an easily accessible way. But looking at the tables is too, I think, is illustrative. The word clouds, as should be said, those are based on absolute difference between the corpora. So it's not that, you know, if we go to the top of the list, it's not that de doesn't occur in the Marcionite collection. It does. It occurs 89 times. It's just that it's well more frequent in the canonical version, almost, you know, 0.5%, which in terms of word patterns is a pretty substantial difference. If a word occurs 1 out of every 200 times in, you know, one text, and 1 out of every 100 times in another text, or 1 out of every 100 and 1 out of every 150, that's a pretty substantial difference if you're looking in the aggregate. We see all the humons and humasses here, but you know, when we look at some of these, like the zero, like we don't really get a sense of absolute absence versus presence. But when we look at the tables, we see that, like ede, 0 times in the Marcionite version, 48 times in the canonical version. Prasumas, 0 in the Marcionite version, 49 times in the canonical version. Christo Jesu, 0, 40. In Christo Jesu, 0, 37. Right? When you start to look at some of these where it's an absolute, right? It's not based on frequencies here as much as just is it there or is it not. Pantete, te. When these also align with some of the things we've seen in the canonical text too, right? If you look at the Marcionite Gospel, the word te, which is just a little enclitic, it's hardly a word you would even notice, but it can add a little bit of emphasis, or it can just make a line sound a little more metrically pleasing. 0 times in the Marcionite text, 25 times in canonical Paul. Again, Jack, going back to your point, why would you take out the word te every time that it occurs? There's no rationality to remove that word. But if you're trying to make a text more artful, if you're trying to make it more pleasing, if you're trying to make it more rhetorically sophisticated, if you're trying to elevate the manner of composition so that it comes across as a more intelligent text, te would be a nice little word to add from time to time into the composition. But I just think that this is a decai. When we start to look at each little feature, Amy, and see that, all these ones that just never occur in the Marcionite text, but occur quite a bit, quite often in the canonical text, it just again reinforces this picture that we have two different styles. I was also just thinking about how large the word cloud was on the Marcionite side versus the smallness of the canonical side. And to me, that speaks to sort of the natural diversity that's within the Marcionite text. This is not an uncomplicated text. It's a rich and detailed text. It has its own sort of vocabulary, its own world that it's living in. And it's intelligible, it's coherent, it's thoughtful, right? It's not a text of little pieces and gaps. It's a robust text that stands on its own right. It's the canonical, when you start comparing these absolute frequency difference, that looks like a redaction because it has these compulsive tendencies to keep adding the community, to keep adding the you references, to keep adding the us references, to change the cadence or the focus of the composition. So to me, the smallness of the canonical cloud actually reinforces that it is a redaction. It's a smaller vocabulary. In some sense, the canonical text does add many new terms. It's just that they aren't highly frequent when you compare them with the Marcionite text. What is clearly frequent is that creation of this fictive community around Paul, this great sort of apostolic and just, I'd say early Catholic church that Paul is now a part of and included within.
Wow. It never ceases to amaze me, all of this, because just to say again for viewers, I mean, we're showing you the outworking of many hours of hard work. This might seem, neatly packaged and now for you to read and digest, and it's fantastic. But the work that particularly Mark has gone to produce this data, I only had a small role in helping reading the data sets. And my goodness, I wanted to pull my eyes out with the boredom that it brings. It's meticulous and it's detailed. And so, again, the skill that Mark has, and also our other behind-the-scenes colleague, Lance, cannot go unnoticed, and indeed shouldn't. And it's aided both Marcus's work and my work so much. We are basically lost without him now, aren't we, Marcus? So I think that's a really natural place for us to end, and I really hope that you have enjoyed today's video, so you can see a little bit, like I say, of what goes on behind the mysterious veil that is academia. We are particularly conscious that for many of you this will be completely new, and indeed for Marcus and I it is too. And so we often are asking Mark lots of questions, reeling off all of the queries that we have. And so just to be aware of that, we're going to be, as much as I can anyway, and I'm sure Mark will be too, looking at the comments. And so if you don't have any questions about any of this stuff, then please do drop them down, and we'll try and answer them as best we can. We hope to continue this as a series as well, taking you deeper still, and that's when you'll really see Marcus and I squirm under the pressure of computational linguistics and data sets, and really beginning to question Mark like the Inquisition. As always, our links are in the bio to Mark's Patreon, and you can support him there for all of the wonderful work he does on this stuff. And also my Patreon and Twitter. Twitter's a great place to keep an eye on Patristica, what we're releasing, when, all that sort of thing. As is the Discord, where I also try and be at least once a month to answer your questions in person. And you often ask me really difficult ones that I can't answer, but I hope at some point to put them to Marcus and Mark in a future podcast. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.